Welcome to the Birth Education Center podcast, hosted by myself, Care Messer, an entrepreneur, birth educator, and doula. My team and I want to help you discover your options in birth and postpartum, how to find your voice, and how to use that voice to navigate our maternal healthcare system. You and your baby are not just a number. This information includes doulas too. Now let's get started. So today's show, we're going to talk a little bit about induction. We're not going to go into this is going to be a very casual discussion. It is induction season coming up, which is why I think we need to release something a little bit earlier. And when I say induction season, I'm talking holiday season, anywhere late fall through January 1st-ish. And it goes for Easter too, because I feel like my inductions increase at Easter as well, because everybody wants to be home with family or they want to go on vacation or whatever. So we just want to have a bit of a discussion on what induction is, especially for first timers. The briefest thing I can say about induction for first timers is it is just, we're going to use procedures and medicines to get you to go into labor to get that baby vaginally delivered, rather than just waiting for your body to start the process and go into what we call spontaneous labor, when your body just does the work. So the biggest myth is that your body will not go into labor ever. That's not true, because if we didn't touch you for 9.5, 10 months, you're going to have a baby at some point. Your body is just never going to stay pregnant forever. So induction is kind of how our system has swayed to, let's get this baby out. And we've forgotten about patience. Whereas sometimes, yes, it is medically necessary, but more times than not, it is an elective induction. And we just kind of want you to understand what all that is. So Ashley and I are here today to talk about it.
Yeah, one of our love-hate topics that we talk about all the time. With Kara and I being birth workers, we've been through our fair share of supporting families through induction, supporting students through induction. And like she said, sometimes it's medically necessary. Sometimes we have a family where something comes up with their baby and it's like, yes, we need to get this baby out for the sake of the family, for the sake of the parent giving birth, for the sake of the baby, whatever it is. But the reality is, in our country, in the US, where we're recording from, the vast majority of inductions are elective. That's a word that Kara already mentioned. And elective means they are chosen. So it's actually really important to know that our induction rate has increased, and for a while was increasing sort of exponentially from the early 90s, when we were looking at an induction rate of, less than 10%. Now we're at an induction rate of over 30%. And while it's been kind of holding steady there, the vast majority of those, as we said, are elective. And when you look at the definition of elective, it means chosen, right? And so when you hear the term elective, or you hear somebody talk about an elective induction, the connotation around that is that they chose to be induced. But the whole reason why we do this podcast and why we teach the classes we do is because we know that in situations where you're talking to a provider, you're not necessarily always getting the full risk and benefits of any procedure that's being offered to you. So if you're not getting all the information, if you're not getting a realistic perspective on what's involved in an induction, how long it's going to take, is it easier than spontaneous labor, more difficult than spontaneous labor, basically all the pros and cons, are you actually making a choice? Or are you being coerced, or are you feeling pressured? Even if it's, hey, yeah, my doctor did give me a full rundown of everything, but my family's pressuring me to do this, or my spouse is pressuring me to do this, then we want to make sure that we know that we are actually electing to do it if we're falling in that category of elective induction, right?
Well, and one of the things that happens is we get families coming into birth education at the end of their pregnancy. So by that time, they've heard, well, if your baby's not too big, then we won't induce. If you want to get that baby out before Christmas, or maybe you want that baby by Thanksgiving so that everybody can celebrate with you with that baby, they're hearing things along the way. Like, if you don't go into labor by 40 weeks, that's the extent of time that our practice will allow you to have a baby. So if you can go into labor ahead of time, especially if you're a vaginal birth after cesarean, right? If you have your baby before your due date, then we won't have a repeat C-section. So there's time limits sometimes by the doc that you've heard about throughout the time of going into appointments. There's, placentas expire. We've heard that a lot, which where's the science behind that? Can you give me like all the studies that say placentas just give up and fall out of a body and then everybody dies? Like, I would like some studies about that. And then there's due dates, like, hey, your baby is already at term at 37 weeks. So anytime after that is a good time to get that baby out. So what happens when families come into class is they're like, I want a natural birth. I want all the tools. They're really excited about that, but I might have to be induced. That's where it's headed, because they've heard all these there's been a lot of seeds planted by the time they've gotten to class. And so the earlier you have some information on induction and where that could be headed, as you're hearing those seeds, you can just make mental notes that, oh, okay, this is what's normal for this practice. Make a note, just so that you're aware that may be coming down the pike with a little more pressure.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where we don't even realize how much we're hearing it, how common it is, until we get to close to our due date and we're like, oh yeah, I guess I'm going to be induced because everybody in my life was induced, all my friends were induced, and it just has become so commonplace that I feel like, just societally speaking, something we talk about all the time and in our classes is that there's a lot of mistrust around the end of pregnancy and whether or not you'll actually go into labor when no one around you has gone into spontaneous labor, been given the chance to go into spontaneous labor, everybody around you's been induced. You really start to think that that is what's normal. And that can really influence your thinking and your choices that you're making for your family.
And at that point, we don't even know what's normal for our bodies, because we have not been taught what our bodies actually do with this process. And I always go back to, it's like a period. You grow that lining every month and then it sheds, and it does it clockwork. It does it the same with pregnancy. It grows a baby and then it sheds it. It's the same thing. Your body has a lot of practice doing this, but with everybody else not doing that and allowing that natural process, you mistrust your own body when it hasn't failed you, right? And when as a human species, it doesn't routinely fail us like that.
And I think kind of something that we will, I'm sure, dig into in later episodes is when you've struggled with maybe like infertility, or you've had losses, or you do have some mistrust in your body leading up to your pregnancy, that can cause you to feel like you're going to have to lean heavily on medicine to get your baby out. And there's no evidence at all that needing help getting pregnant or needing help regulating your hormones in pregnancy or anything like that means you're not going to be able to go into spontaneous labor or have a baby. We understand birth is pretty automated.
I had that same thing because of all my losses. I was so afraid that I wouldn't be able to do this without medical intervention. And one of my midwives said, you've been baking this baby just fine every single day. For whatever reason, if it's the baby choosing to stay or your body going, I got this now, you may have needed help getting pregnant and things to sustain this pregnancy, but you've been growing a baby great. Let's let it unfold. Let's see where it goes, instead of pushing you into one direction because of that deep mistrust.
We want to make it really clear that we're not on one side of any procedure or the other side of any procedure. We know and understand that induction is right for some people, and we know that it's not the right choice for some people. But when we're talking about serious medical interventions like induction, the biggest thing that we want to emphasize always is autonomy. When we're talking about autonomy in the medical setting, it is the ability to say yes or no to any given procedure.
Without feeling pressured or coerced.
Yes, without feeling pressured or coerced. And we're going to dig real deep into autonomy in future episodes. Like, it's one of our favorite topics. Unlike induction, which is a love-hate topic, autonomy is something that we could talk about for hours. But in order to have autonomy, you need to have all the information. You need to really understand the risks and benefits. What are the risks and benefits of doing the induction? That's something that I feel like is missing from a lot of provider conversations. They're happy to tell you the risks of not doing the induction, the risks of declining, but will they share the risks of accepting the induction and going through with it? And when we talk about risks, I always tell my clients and my students that the risk conversation should be multifaceted. The risks shouldn't just be everybody dies or everybody lives. It should be, what are the risks to my physical well-being? What are the risks to my goal of a natural birth? What are the risks to my goal of a vaginal birth?
What are the risks to the baby?
What are the risks to my baby? Not just the risks of we all make it out of this alive, right? As we talk about so often, that's the baseline, is everybody makes it out alive. But there actually is a really important discussion to be had about how risks and benefits are shared. And then not just in induction, but in so many different areas of medicine, that we're really being honest about the whole picture when we're talking about choosing a procedure or not choosing a procedure. And, we've supported so many families through the induction process. And like I said in the beginning, many of them were necessary. Many of them we were sort of like, did the family need to go through with that? And they were really unhappy with and had a really difficult time with their experience. And so that's why we're so passionate about making sure that you're considering all of your options.
Well, and I think that because I do a lot of placenta encapsulation for people, I meet people that have not been in our classes or who didn't take any classes at all, who didn't have a doula, didn't know much about birth. They just turned everything over to their providers. They trusted that and they just went into it like, okay, I'm being induced, and thinking it'll be a 9 to 5 birth. It'll be quick and easy. And on the end part, whether they had a vaginal birth or a cesarean, sometimes it's days and days and days. And so I hear the sadness and the mistrust or the trauma or the nobody told me this, or I felt like a pincushion. Everything was done to me. I felt like a stuck pig. I couldn't move. Because they didn't ask any questions. They didn't understand the full scoop of what an induction can be. And also, if you do know the full scoop of what an induction can be, you can prepare for it. So it's not as traumatic or horrific or whatever you didn't like, or, if you can expect the ebbs and flows of it and understand what this would mean and what this would mean and how you can react to it and have some responses to those situations, it's not as dire as it would have been if you go in absolutely unsuspecting. And you can have a really good induction if that's what you choose or that's what you need. But there are things along the way to get you more prepared and conversations to have to make that a reality. And when we go into induction season, I'm just going to talk about November through January 1st-ish, and then also big holidays like Easter, sometimes even Memorial Day and Labor Day. Those discussions can come up. There's a lot of pressure to have a baby, and it's not just from providers. It could be from your work. We really need you back in the workplace by this time. It could be your family. Like, don't we want the baby here for Christmas or Thanksgiving? Or, it can be from your accountant or your partner about, let's get this baby out January, 1st for next year's because this year's write-offs are okay, or right after Christmas or right before Christmas so that tax write-off comes here. It could be friends, it could be family, it could be sisters, there's a lot of pressure about when this baby should arrive or when it's best for this baby to arrive. No one's ever asking the baby.
Exactly.
Maybe because that's a little difficult to do. But as birth educators, our goal is for you to have a beautiful experience that you feel relaxed and calm, because that also influences how the baby feels about trust and fear or not when they're coming into the world. And if you can remain in a rational state or comfortable, not nervous, anxious state, you're going to make better decisions and you're going to feel more confident about your decisions that you're going to be making. So I actually talk about the trauma and the dissatisfaction and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different reasons why we feel that pressure to induce. And as we've mentioned right from the beginning, sometimes that pressure comes from providers. Sometimes that comes from family and friends. Sometimes it's just the pressure of, I'm miserable, I hate this, and I want this pregnancy to be over. I feel like I see this the most in my families that are the end of pregnancy falls in the hot summer months. But
September,
I know that feeling of being very, 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 very pregnant over Christmas time and just being miserable, feeling like I couldn't enjoy the holiday. And so that creates pressure as well of like, what if I could just not feel like this anymore? What if I could just have my baby? I just want to have my baby. And when someone's sort of dangling this idea in front of you of just come on in, we'll just schedule your induction, come on in, you don't have to be pregnant anymore. But without giving you that full realistic picture of what that's going to look like, then we're setting ourselves up for trauma. And there are many studies, many surveys of different parents' experiences that conclude over and over again that induction of labor is associated with a higher rate of dissatisfaction with their birth experience, as well as reporting feeling traumatized by their experience, and sometimes even as so far as post-traumatic stress disorder associated with their birth experience, more so than spontaneous birth. And the reason for this, I think overwhelmingly, if we were to really break it down, is that lack of awareness of what they're getting themselves into. It's that I went in thinking I was going to have a baby. I was there for 3 days. I had so many vaginal exams. I had so many pokes and prods done. I had an IV for so long. I was withheld food and water. All these different things that obviously vary from facility to facility, exactly what goes into the induction process. But by and large, they're long. And rather than a spontaneous labor that is typically 12 to 24 hours, we're talking about something that is more of a 48 to 72 hour process, and something that goes 24 hours a day while you're there in the induction process. It's not like you take nights off for an induction. You are, getting procedures, getting monitoring, getting things done to you 24/7 while you're in the hospital for your induction. And so that all of that, the length of time that it takes, the amount of procedures that are done, the lack of bodily autonomy, because you're sort of handing over your experience to the facility, and the just sheer number of things that are done, like you kind of mentioned earlier, feeling like a pincushion, and just the sort of list of interventions that are done that are involved in an induction process can leave people feeling very traumatized, exhausted, obviously. And that's another thing, is that just like the sheer exhaustion that people experience going into the postpartum period, coming off of an induction, can also make you at a higher risk for postpartum depression, and really make that postpartum period really difficult, because you've been going at your induction process for, the last 48 to 72 hours. So that realistic perspective can go a long way to, like you mentioned, if you know what you're getting yourself into, really honestly know what you're getting yourself into, you can set yourself up for a much more successful experience in navigating that.
And one thing that I hear too is, well, I really wanted a natural birth. I thought I could do it unmedicated without the epidural, whatever. So they didn't plan on what if they do get the epidural and what that looks like. So then they really feeling stuck with, I didn't get what I wanted. I couldn't move. It only worked on one side, because they didn't even understand that procedure, because they just knew they weren't going to get it.
Yeah.
Things change. And when we're inducing a labor, it ebbs and flows. There's so many things to navigate, which is one reason you really want a doula if there's some kind of induction going on, because your body's reacting differently than it may have in a normal spontaneous labor. So yeah, that's probably the hardest thing for educators to hear, is I just didn't know that. And even is more frustrating for educators to hear is when we know we covered it in class and we talked about it in depth, and we had discussion on it with note taking. And then they said, no one ever told me that. And I'm like, oh, we totally talked about it.
Oh, the pregnant brain.
Right. And there's also something too, when you're in a natural birth class, even if you're planning on getting an epidural, you're in a natural birth class thinking, but that doesn't apply to me because I'm not XYZ. We talk about cesarean. Yeah. And that we'll talk about a cesarean and all the things that go along with that. And they're like, that's not my story, but it could be. So this is why we discuss it. And that's the whole point of getting educated earlier, so that you always have a choice to say yes or no. You don't have to make any decision in the room when your provider brings it up at whatever week it is to get you on the schedule. You can go home with your partner and talk about it and say, do we want to get on the schedule? I've heard that a lot where, no, it was just if we don't get you on now, there's not going to be any room for your induction.
Yeah.
Well, then it's not an emergency.
Right.
Because if it was an emergency, you would say, come on over and we'll get you started.
Yep.
So it's obviously not an emergency if we have to do the scheduling today, right? And they'll fit you in. I guarantee they'll fit you in. It's never oh, we've run out. Although that has happened too, oh, sorry, now we're booked. It's going to be an extra week and a half. Obviously, it's elective at that point. If there was an emergency happening today, they would take you right over to labor and delivery. Right. So the bottom line for this episode is just, we want you to be successful and have a birth that, in this once in a lifetime opportunity to be with your baby, the first time you're meeting them, we want that to be as pleasurable and calm and beautiful as possible. And the way you set yourself up for success is to get educated about how your body would normally work, what the induction process looks like, what your provider and your hospital provide for that, and how you're going to navigate that system. And that takes intention. It takes time to research that and understand it, which is why I would much rather you get into some kind of birth education earlier rather than later, but also just be open to the process of talking to people that are professionals in the industry about alternatives for induction if you do want one, maybe just how to ripen your body instead of, so that if you do need one by 42 weeks, your body might move into it a little bit easier, but not waiting until the last second to not have any resources and any information about what could have made it a successful, calm, beautiful birth story.
Yeah, I mean, and education's the key to everything. You're going to hear us say it over and over and over again, but
200 times a day.
Exactly. What our educated families have is the ability to meet their providers in the middle. And I think that people often see doulas and educators and like the quote unquote natural birth community as being all the way over here and medical providers being all the way over here. And Karen and I can speak to the fact that, 99% of our students are hospital birthing families. They are using modern medicine as part of their birth process. So we don't want them to be over here. We want them to be able to have conversations with their provider where we are meeting in the middle, where we're extending an olive branch. If we're having that conversation about, well, we need to get you on the schedule. Okay, I see you wanting to get me on the schedule at 39 weeks. I'm not comfortable with that. I am comfortable scheduling an induction the day I hit 41 weeks or when I'm 41 in 3 days or whatever that is. And that way, you're saying, hey, I'm cool getting on the schedule. I understand that. I know that you don't like a lot of people pregnant in the wild, and that can be really unpredictable. That we're meeting in the middle where you would be comfortable saying, okay, I've been pregnant long enough, and where your provider would say, you've been pregnant long enough, and kind of finding a middle ground. I would say like education gives you the ability to sort of extend an olive branch and say, I understand. I understand where you're coming from. Here's where I'm coming from. Because remember, as we're going to talk about, and as you even heard us say in the first few episodes, right? Your provider is somebody you're hiring to help you. So we don't want them to be your adversary. We want them to be that complementary part of your birth team that you have hired to help you. And so when you get educated and when you have support, you're able to really create that relationship that you were hoping to have when you hired them in the first place.
And the olive branch can also be, I'm not comfortable until 42 weeks.
Exactly.
The olive branch can also be, if I go over 42 weeks, I go over 42 weeks. I'm willing to accept that risk because I don't feel comfortable getting induced at all. And if you're not seeing any medical substantial risk to getting induced, even though your provider is pushing that, just have the conversation. Thank you. I appreciate your opinion. I'm going to do this. Always is okay. Yep. Because it's what is going to work for your family. You are not a number in the system, and you have to feel comfortable and confident with whichever choice you make. If you're feeling pressure, you need to back out of that and go, okay, am I making this decision out of fear or love? What is going to make me feel calm in my system? What does my intuition or my gut say? And whatever that olive branch is, I know a lot of times it's like I've heard families say, I don't like confrontation. And I am dreading going to my 41-week appointment because I know what's coming. And it's like, well, the fact is you are going to go to that appointment. I mean, you can still stay home. That's also an option.
Yeah.
But let's talk about what you can say that will make you feel more confident. Do we have to role play that? Or are you just okay with being coerced into whatever you don't want? Because that's a choice too, right? I don't like confrontation either, but I've practiced enough now that I can have those conversations. We really work hard in our classes to build team mentality. How are we all going to work together to get the same goal of a healthy family, a healthy baby, and a family that isn't feeling coerced or pressured?
Or traumatized.
Or traumatized, exactly. Right. Because the baseline is just we all live. That's a basic baseline. I want you to thrive. And building a team environment, but also knowing what your limits are and being okay with saying yes or no to those limits is going to make you feel like you were heard and that you had some control over a situation that we have no control over. Because this baby is that extra bit of unknown. How are they going to handle the induction or non-induction or all of that? That is the risk factor that we have to accept and weigh with anything that we're choosing.
Exactly.
So with this bonus episode, the goal is find some education, look at your support, and have some conversations that might be a little uncomfortable for you.
Yeah, it may not be our favorite topic, but we love to talk about autonomy, making choices, getting informed, getting educated. And so any topic where we can revisit those things with you, we'll do it anytime.
And as always, we want to hear your thoughts. Anything that you have questions on, please put it in the comments and we will get to those as soon as we can. All right, we'll be seeing you next week.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. And remember, it's your body, your choice, and finding your voice is your power. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us in all the places, and go to birtheducationcenter.com for our blog and more online education classes. And we'll see you next week.